Canary by Cloud 9 and 3/4. Chapter 47. Sacrifices. When Shinso left his room that morning, he stopped in the corridor. The door to Midoriya's room, next door, was wide open. He crept around it unsurely and peered inside. His bed was left messy and unmade, pajamas tossed aside with equal untidiness, which was unlike him. Midoriya liked everything to at least have some kind of order and logic. Not to the extent that Ida did, but still. He stood there for a moment, and Todoroki soon joined him. "We should get going. We'll be late for registration," he voiced. "Yeah." Shinso nodded, shifting the position of his bag over his shoulder. He remembered that the work-study group had all received messages yesterday evening, probably indicating that something big was about to go down, and Shinso had a strong feeling it revolved around Eri. "He'll be okay," Todoroki said as they walked down the stairs together, leaving Midoriya's door swinging open as he'd left it. Shinso swallowed and nodded. "I know." But it was a lie. Because he didn't know. And a nagging thought in the back of his mind reminded him that there was a good chance that he was not okay. Even now. It was just like before when Midoriya was with the villains. Shinso knew he was out there fighting somewhere, but it was out of his reach. He couldn't help him now. All he could do was hope that he wouldn't be a reckless idiot again and overdo it. "Besides," Todoroki added as they reached the door, giving him the slightest of smiles as he turned his head, "he has Siren to look after him." Shinso let himself grin too. "Yeah, obviously. And that little bird is indestructible." "Exactly." His friend nodded. He passed him a cup of coffee from the side of the table. Perhaps he'd made it before coming up to check on him. Shinso had slipped in quite late, which was unlike him. Everything was backwards, wasn't it? Shinso accepted it with a grateful nod after putting on his shoes, and the two left Heights Alliance together. "I heard Mr. Aizawa was going with the work-studies group," Shinso remembered. "Maybe we won't get told off for being a little bit late then. By anyone other than Ida, that is." Todoroki grinned. "Yeah." Shinso sighed. "I bet it's Prism Mike. You don't know the pain of his morning registrations. His afternoon ones weren't much better. But the mornings, God, he's so loud. I'm not live enough for this." "I wonder if Canary will ever end up being more like Prism Mike," pondered Todoroki, swirling his own cup thoughtfully. "God, I hope not," Shinso groaned. "I could see it happening, though. Midoriya's always been so energetic and enthusiastic. He was just so shy and apologetic about it." "He's improving, though." "Yeah, and quickly, too. Ever since Eri's quirk saved his voice, he's really, I don't know, either figured things out or made them worse." Todoroki shrugged. "Probably a bit of both." "Probably," Shinso agreed, chugging the rest of his coffee and letting the last few droplets run down the edge of the mug that now hung leisurely from his fingertips as they strolled along. In the morning light, a couple of birds dove in front of them, twisting around in the air happily. "I hope they find Eri," said Todoroki, breaking the eerie calm. Shinso just nodded, watching a warm trickle of liquid escape from the little volume that remained in the cup and run down his hand. "Me too." Somewhere... Bang! Siren! Over the rainbow. Midoriya had always been good at dodging, avoiding the inevitable, running away, but without some kind of intense speed booster, not even he could dodge a bullet. Way up high. Siren had been on his shoulder. She moved before the masked man pulled the trigger, a little green blur before him. There 1 second gone, the next tossed to the ground in a flurry of feathers and the syringe-like shape of the red bullet. There's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby. Siren, no! Midoriya yelled as the bird plummeted to the ground, tumbling across the room until she flopped up against a great concrete spike, surrounded by the broken pieces of the red bullet contrasting horrendously against her green self. "You hit the stupid bird!" Somewhere over the rainbow. I'm sorry," called back the man who had shot her. Nemoto. There was a crash and another bang, and a piece of the wall behind Midoriya fell to pieces. From it came Night-Eye and Mr. Aizawa. The concrete had been very thin, and Night-Eye must have used his compressed weights to hammer it apart, forming a hole just large enough to haul themselves through. Skies are blue. Lemillion! Eri! Night-Eye called out, leaping over the rock and rubble towards the two of them. He wrapped them into a tight embrace, muttering his praise to his battered student. Eri's gaze did not leave Midoriya's as he scrambled over to Siren. And the dreams. With shaking hands, he scooped her up. No! Siren, no! That you dare to dream. Warm liquid trickled down the back of Midoriya's fingers, and a silent tear from his cheek. But the bird was still breathing. Really do come true. Meanwhile, Mr. Aizawa had charged at Overhaul. His eyes glowed red as he went in for the attack.
Lemillion's backed you into a corner. It's time you paid for what you've done.
Midoriya didn't think he'd ever seen his teacher look so angry, although he hadn't spent nearly enough time around him, being far more used to President Mike's attitude than Mr. Aizawa's.
Wake up, Chrono!
Still by Siren, Midoriya didn't have the time to warn Mr. Aizawa about the fallen man in the white hood. The hero spotted him too, but too late. An arrow-like strand of hair shot out from under the fabric piercing Aizawa's arm.
Erisa!
Night-Eye called out. Take care of them, Canary! He ordered. He charged toward Mr. Aizawa, who was literally falling in slow motion. The act of that mysterious person's quirk, no doubt. His eyes uncontrollably started to drift shut, droplets of water oozing from them as the time slowed around him. His erasure effect would wear off soon. With Siren in his unsteady palms, Midoriya leapt over to the huddle, letting the bird slide into his pocket as he reached out for Eri, taking her into his arms as the entire floor erupted. Someday I'll wish. He shut his eyes tight, holding Eri close. He felt Mirio's arms around the two of them too, shielding them from the debris Overhaul created with an anguished cry. Go! Take Eri! Go! Mirio insisted, gripping Midoriya's arm and pushing him gently away. Upon a star. Not happening! Midoriya said through gritted teeth. And wake up where? But then his mouth fell agape, because now standing before Night-Eye was not Mr. Aizawa, nor Overhaul, or any of his underlings. This was something entirely different. Overhaul had used his quirk on himself, pulling himself apart alongside the man who had tried to shoot Midoriya, and had put the two back together again, forming one unnatural monster. The clouds are far behind me. Get out of here! Go! Night-Eye instructed. All of you! Midoriya didn't know where Mr. Aizawa had gone and that guy in the hood, but he had Eri and he had Mirio. Where the clouds are far behind. Can you walk? He asked the older student. Yes, then follow me. Me. Scooping up Eri, he led the way back to that hole in the wall. He let Mirio squeeze through first, passed Eri through to him, and then followed. His head screamed at him for leaving Night-Eye behind, but he had always been good at running away. Where troubles melt like lemon drops. The weight of it all pulled him back like the chains that were once clamped around his arms. But he pushed on forwards, trying to support Mirio the best he could, despite him being much taller. He was growing weaker by the second. They hadn't gotten far before. Away above the chimney tops. Sir! Night-Eye took a blow to the chest. That's where. Is this what you want, Eri? Overhaul called out. There was a mouth on his hand, the mouth of the other man he'd destroyed to reform this new horrific body. You. Eri's big rosy eyes stared at Night-Eye, at the spike through his body, and at the agony etched on his face. Find. No! She whimpered, getting down from Mirio's arms. Eri! No, stop! Midoriya tried. He was defeated so easily. The hypnotizing voice continued. Lemillion doesn't have the strength left. And you really think that little bird would stand a chance? Midoriya was still holding Mirio up as Aries started to walk back to her captor. Bluebird? Somewhere. No, I don't, she whimpered, now running barefoot towards that monster. Over the rainbow.
Then what should you do?
Bluebirds fly. Go back to you.
No! Eri, no! Don't listen to him!
Midoriya protested, carefully lowering Mirio to the floor. He pulled Siren from his pocket and handed her carefully over. Without a word, he ran after Eri. If birds fly...
Go get him, Canary,
were the feeble words of Mirio as he charged back into the fight. Over the rainbow. And in exchange, Eri demanded, her little hands balled into fists before Overhaul. You have to make everyone better again. Why, oh why?
That's right.
Overhaul grinned, looking up at Midoriya as he came to a halt just after the hole in the wall.
You see, Canary, she doesn't want your help. You never saved her. You only brought pain on her and everyone else.
Midoriya lowered his head.
Can't I? No, I didn't save her.
Eri stopped.
Oh, if...
Midoriya looked up and glared with all the anger he could muster. If he couldn't control it, then he would use it.
Happy? She saved me!
Little bluebirds fly. Tears brimmed in Eri's eyes as she gazed back at him.
She saved me!
Midoriya repeated with greater determination.
And now it's my turn to give everything I've got in return!
Beyond the rainbow.
It will be your doom.
Midoriya smiled.
Maybe.
Why, oh, why?
But if there's even the smallest chance that I can change the future and make you smile again, Bluebird, then I will.
Can't I? Eri took a few more steps towards him. She was clutching a piece of red fabric, what remained of Mirio's cape. Why? She fell back into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably.
This canary's still singing,
Midoriya said, stroking the hair around Eri's horn gingerly.
And I will never stop. Never again.
Why can't? Don't leave me, Eri sobbed, clutching his jacket tightly. Midoriya shook his head.
No, never. I promise.
Eri wanted to go with Overhaul, because if she did, they wouldn't get hurt anymore. She didn't know Lemillion well, but he had been so kind. He was smiling even when he was hurt. He almost lost his quirk because of her. It was her fault, and then Siren got her too. She didn't know where the bird was now. She hoped she was okay. And Canary, it felt like so long ago when she ran into him in the streets. He took her to places she never thought she'd be able to see, where people are happy and kind, where they smile no matter what. Eri had felt that too, the happiness. Then Canary took her out for a walk. She liked doing that. She liked hearing the birds and looking at the sky. But it wasn't Canary. It was a scary woman. She took her back to Overhaul. Now she wasn't sure who was who, but this was definitely her Canary. He was kind and had the prettiest voice in the world. Owl had a pretty voice too, but she seemed shyer about it. They were all going to sing and dance for Canary. Eri saw them practice. She wanted to see it, their performance. She wanted to see them finish it. Momo. She missed Momo. She wanted to be with Canary. She wanted to go home.
This wasn't home. It never was. She understood what home felt like now, and Overhaul was a bad man. No, she didn't want to go with him. She wanted to stay with Canary, with his wide smile and kind words. But then there was a big bang and the whole roof fell in! There was a dragon! And Eri knew this had to be another hero. She liked heroes. That she had decided. From the hole the dragon had formed, there was a glow of light. The sky! She wanted to reach out to it. Dove was there, and Froppy too. It lit a light inside her that had been all but extinguished. Something that she was so unused to. Oh, give me Eri! Overhaul cried. All of a sudden, Eri felt herself being ripped from Canary's arms, knocked by a pillar of rock that extended high into the sky. Still holding onto Lemillion's cape, Eri was with Overhaul, now clutched within one of his claw-like hands. You don't understand her true power! He yelled down at Canary. Eri couldn't quite see him from up on this pillar. Her vision was all blurry from the tears. All you think of is pathetic things like restoration. Whilst I see a world made new. The power to destroy everything you know. That is Eri. They were close to the surface now. The freedom of the sky, so close yet so far. Eri curled up into herself, ready to take the pain. She couldn't be saved. No. But she saved me! And now it's my turn to give everything I've got in return! Please. Dove! Make me float! Canary cried. Please, I have to get up there! Uraraka gazed at him. It felt so long ago that the same boy struggled to utter a word to her. No. Everyone gazed down to Night Eye lying in Uraraka's arms. They hadn't removed the spike. No, if you chase after them, you'll die, Canary, he wheezed. Uraraka's eyes grew wide. Night Eye's quirk, foresight. He'd seen the future. You won't save the girl, he continued, forming the sentence out of spite in his obvious pain. You and I will die. It is a future we cannot avoid. I'm sorry. Uraraka turned slowly back to Canary. It was not fear, but sheer determination that filled his eyes. I made a promise, and I'm not going to break it. You risk breaking yourself. I don't care. Uraraka, now! We'll help you, Tsuyu insisted, struggling to get to her feet. That fight had taken a lot out of all of them, especially with that horrible energy-draining quirk. Uraraka slowly reached out over Night Eye's form. With tears in her eyes, she said, You have to finish that promise to me. That you'll see us all soon, okay? Canary grinned. It was sad, sympathetic, as he reached back out towards him. I'll try, he said. It wasn't a promise. Nonetheless, Uraraka gripped his hand and allowed his body to drift slowly off the ground. With a deep breath, he pulled his headphones on over his head, tapped something onto the device stubbornly tied around his arm, and a gentle rising sound began to play. He started to hum it, pushing up off the floor and rising up into the sky, taking the music with him. The back of his jacket, Uraraka could see the painted green wings there. The way it was blown around in the soft wind gave the illusion of real wings as he clutched his fists into balls and reached Overhaul's eyeline, still hovering before him. Down below, Uraraka gulped, her hands ready to release him as soon as he was safe. You could do this, Canary. You think a little song can stop me? Overhaul drawled. Midoriya wasn't safely over the edge yet, still hovering just before him as he continued to hum. I hope it's meaningful, he sighed, perhaps indicating that he didn't know it or understand the lyrics. Good. It'll be the last one you ever sing. No, please! Eri begged, struggling out of Overhaul's grip, still holding onto the ripped cape. Don't hurt him anymore! Overhaul just clutched her tighter in his claw, letting out a slight manic laugh as Midoriya drew closer with a slight kick of his legs. Too late, Eri. You brought this upon him yourself.
But as the music finally began to swell, Midoriya let himself grin. And Uraraka let go of her power just as the verse began for him to slam down into the rock before him. I'm waking up, overall roared to ash and dust. He lunged, wrecking the pillar beneath their feet as he did so, and I sweat my rust. He couldn't help but smile, not just to look brave for Eri, but this was his element. It was all just a dance after all. He inhaled mockingly along with the song, feeling the power he had cultivated starting to swell beneath. Midoriya dodged and twirled. How at ease he seemed, infuriated overall. He lashed out, obliterating the platform on which they were standing upon. Eri screamed as she fell from the villain's grip. Midoriya threw himself off the crumbling edge and managed to grab Eri with one hand. By some miracle, his momentum allowed him to reach a spike protruding from the wall with the other, which he gripped with his free hand. Grunting in the pain of his arm being wrenched, he forced himself to keep singing. As it turns out, Overhaul's reason for falling was to get to the other Yakuza thug. Oh no. He quickly shifted Eri to his back and leapt from the spike with the greatest swing he could muster. I feel it in my bones! The power was growing. He hoped it was enough as he winced and held out his hands to the wall he was heading right towards. My systems blow! Green-tipped fingers dug into the rock. It melted before him with a sizzle and a crackle of green power. With a dreaded turn of his head, Midoriya's eyes met that of Overall once more. He rose up from the depths as a beast beyond compare. A horrific fusion of three separate people. To the new age. A manic laugh, and the monster reached out to grasp Midoriya and Eri. His power wasn't strong enough to do what he wanted yet. He couldn't even tell Eri to hold on tight as he pushed off the well. Somersaulted through the air and landed on the back of that giant head. Radioactive! Not a moment's hesitation passed as he charged up the length of Overhaul's arm, dodging his attacks as the villain seemed not to care if he teared himself even further apart. Now on what seemed to be his shoulder. Midoriya took another leap of faith, holding Eri now tight in his arms as he rolled onto the surface cushioned by his power, which ripped the road apart into softer sand and gravel. I'll raise my flags! Overall's claw reached up and scratched at the concrete, hauling himself upwards. Meanwhile, Midoriya put Eri down. Without being able to speak to her, he signed one of the few words he taught her. Fly! We're painted red to fit right in. She understood, turned on her heel, and ran! Just in time for Midoriya to dodge the fist that attempted to squash him like a bung. I'm breaking in and shaping up. Overall towered before him now. This hadn't been what he expected. This wasn't a plan A nor B, but he'd make it work. This isn't... He took a fighting stance. The apocalypse! And stared defiantly up at his opponents. There was a rumble, and Midoriya struggled to maintain his balance. As the chorus began, he raised his hands forward to protect himself. I feel it in my bones! Moving spikes and pillars erupted from the ground right at Midoriya's hands which glowed the same toxic green that now filled the sclera of his eyes. Welcome to the new age! He skidded backwards but not far, as his feet dug into the undamaged road, and Overall's attack hissed and bubbled into a molten mess that joined the toxic pool beneath Midoriya's feet. To the new age! Attack after attack. Midoriya managed to deflect and evade. Yes, there were other songs out there that could have defeated Overhaul, but this, after much experimentation, not only proved to be safer to others and himself than Midoriya initially expected, but it shouldn't kill Overhaul, and was one of the best and most satisfying counters to the devastating ability that Midoriya could find. Radioactive! A power to rip apart and ruin whatever Midoriya pleased. One of the only powers that could make this monster of a man surrender. He could see it in his eyes. A fear of something he so easily could have prevented and destroyed not so long ago. Radioactive! Get out of here! All systems. Midoriya turned his head from Overhaul for a second, likely unwise in the intense battle, but he had been knocked a while back. And that was Aries' voice. The sun hasn't died. She was in the arms of Uraraka, but she was melting. Her costume dripped off her alongside her skin, revealing the manic expression of Toga. That too quickly melted when she saw not only the sparks forming at Aries' horn, but the glowing green of Midoriya's furious eyes. He'd had enough! I'm waking. One hand extended towards Toga and the other at Overall. A minute amount of time before the chorus began, he let out the greatest expanse of his power as possible. 2 beams of green light, one which went straight through Overhaul's beastly body, and the other penetrating Toga's shoulder. Make my systems blow! Toga turned to dust, but Midoriya didn't have time to be relieved that she had just been a clone. Skidding towards Eri as her power spilled, as free and uncontrolled as Midoriya's words, he wrapped himself around her. Welcome to the new age, to the new age. With the obscuring glow of green, Overall hadn't noticed the release of Aries' power, and with the arm that hadn't been obliterated, he reached out to tear the two of them apart once and for all. I'm radioactive, radioactive! Many witnessed it, but none could say quite what happened. But they knew it was with a great explosion of green and gold that Overall and his counterparts were torn apart. Radioactive! Radioactive! You, Canary! At the sound of his name, Midoriya forced his eyes open. He met Mirio's instantly. Seeing him up on the surface and out of danger was more than a relief. You're okay, Midoriya said with a groan as he tried to figure out what had just happened. He found himself propped up against a large boulder-like structure. His head was spinning and eyes drooping, begging to block out the light of day once more. Without questioning his situation, Midoriya gripped onto the rock and hauled himself to his feet. It's okay, Canary, Mirio insisted. The fight is over. Over? Midoriya stammered. Over? Oh, where's... About to be taken away. The older student nodded, pointing over towards a collection of vehicles outside the Yakuza stronghold. Memories came back in shards as Midoriya recalled clambering up here during his battle against Overhaul. And Eri? He stammered after a moment of thought. Mirio nodded. She's okay. Unconscious, but okay. Midoriya let out a sigh of relief. Oh, and... Midoriya blinked as Mirio reached for his utility belt. In one of the little pockets there, now deprived of emergency medical equipment, was a little bundle of red cloth. He pulled it out and handed it over to Midoriya. The familiar weight made Midoriya inhale sharply as he undid the little package. Careful, Mirio insisted, holding his hands forward as if to stop him. Midoriya met his eyes for a moment before slowly returning to the ripped piece of cape and what was concealed inside of it. Siren. Too many times had Midoriya found a situation where the little green bird was found stained red with a slightly crooked wing and a disgruntled expression. But this time was different. As soon as her eyes were uncovered, she made a break for freedom, which she failed due to her injury. Midoriya almost fell over in his attempts to catch her. She didn't give up, though, and continued to fight desperately. Something's wrong with her, Mirio explained. Maybe she's scared, or maybe it was something to do with that bullet. I don't know, but it's a miracle she's still alive. Well, that was Siren for you. But this wasn't Siren. Siren, please! Midoriya exclaimed as she wrestled from his grip once more. She didn't get far through the air before she tumbled to the ground. Now lying face up with her legs waving about, Midoriya crouched down in front of her. She stopped moving as she cocked her head to one side and looked up at him. He sat there for a few minutes, just staring at her, until his vision went blurry. Somehow he knew what was wrong, but he didn't want to admit it to himself. The melancholy was broken, though, with a cry from Mirio. Midoriya barely acknowledged his fading footfalls for a few uncharted moments, until he finally turned his head. There, amongst the growing crowd of officials, a man was hauled onto a stretcher by Uraraka, whose hands were shaking, coming away stained red.
The paramedics hid the full situation from view, but from the spike protruding from the injured man's stomach, Midoriya quickly realized the truth. It was Night-Eye. His breathing became shallow as he watched the paramedics move around him frantically. Some comforted Uraraka and pulled her gingerly away, whilst others held back Mirio. The remainder attended to Night-Eye himself, assessing the full extent of the damage as quickly as they could. Midoriya turned back to Siren. It took only a few milliseconds more for him to steady his wobbling lip. Siren was hopping around on the rubble limply now, paying him little attention. She was slowing down, losing a lot of blood. He had to fix this. What about Eri's quirk? No. Eri's unconscious. She has no control, and it's unfair on her. Midoriya's quirk is volatile, like hers, but he does have control and potential. Potential to reverse this, whatever that bullet did to Siren. Okay. Sir Night-Eye! No! Was Mirio's hoarse shout. No, focus. No! You gotta live! You can't die on me, sir, no! Reverse, undo, heal. We need to get him straight to the hospital. Please, back away. Heal. Rewind. Fix! Tears spilled down Midoriya's face, still watching Siren, who had now sat down, ignoring him as she weakly tried to groom her injured side. He couldn't look over at Night-Eye.
And you try your best, but you don't succeed. Midoriya sang softly, his voice catching slightly in his throat. When you get what you want, but not what you need. Siren tucked her head under her wing, her little body shaking and slipping on the rock. Was she dying? Would taking her to a vet mean anything at this point? They wouldn't prioritize getting her there over the devastatingly injured heroes behind him. Stuck in rivers. Midoriya took a deep breath as he continued. He couldn't help his tears. He often couldn't. This was most certainly not an exception. There was so much going on. Too many situations around him, above him, probably below him. Dire situations. He just hoped that this song wouldn't just make rivers run from his eyes, more tears than there were already, rather than what he wanted it to do. He'd done his best to ensure that Radioactive did what he wanted it to do, but he had less control over what song did what than he had initially thought. Could it be worse? But as the chorus began, he tilted his head away from Siren. He felt like the sound of the world around him was all but null. All he could hear was his song, despite the distant cries and yells from the world around him. It seemed to move in slow motion as his friends, at the sight of Night-Eye, and now even Kirishima and Hamajiki, as they too returned battered and bruised. They were hauled onto stretchers, the ambulances and their crews rushing around as efficiently as they could, yet they still hadn't got Night-Eye moving. But amongst the sound, that persistent thought crawled to the front of Midoriya's mind. A thought that said maybe he could fix you. He stood up, tears blurring his vision. He stood there for a moment, ignoring the slight tremble of his legs and the throbbing of his head. It took nearly all the strength he had left to turn on his heel and pull himself away from Siren. Each footstep was harder than the last over the unsteady ground. But he knew that this was the right thing to do. It was the only thing that drove him forward. He didn't know Night-Eye well. He couldn't say that he was his favorite hero either. He was stern and seemed to be rather fickle and difficult from the few situations where they'd found themselves in each other's company. None of that mattered, though. And high up above or down below. Focus all his power on Night-Eye, everything he had. It might be his only chance to live through this. He was in the most trouble. Midoriya knew he had already reached his limit. He was tired. His whole body threatened to crumble to the ground at any second. But if you never try, you'll never know. He was at Night Eye's side now. The gathering crowd parted and the paramedics stopped in their tracks, watching Midoriya's hand drift over to Night Eye's side, as the hero's weak eyes watched on in morbid curiosity. Lights will guide. They spilled off his hand, the lights drifting like the seeds of a dandelion around them. A few landed on Night Eye around the rock that persisted to protrude from his stomach. They melted with a brighter glow before simmering out of view. Midoriya's eyes were so blurry that he couldn't quite make out if he was doing anything. Fix you. He was humming the instrumental now, as frantic ambulance workers conversed and decided to remove the spike. The song was at its weakest at the moment, but there was nothing Midoriya could do about that. They had to get the foreign object out of him if Midoriya ever hoped to let his power do anything worthwhile. He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Uraraka. Tears were spilling down her cheeks too as she picked up the tune and started to sing along. She had to look away though as the spike was removed. Midoriya couldn't bring himself to and simply watched as those dwindling lights found themselves attracted magnetically to the injury, falling like glowing rain. Or tears. No. Rain. Rain like when he'd first used his quirk. The droplets fell like fire from the heavens, a healing wish, proof of how far he'd come. Oh, and how far that was. Asui hopped over. In her hands was a green creature of a hue ever so slightly different to that of her hero costume. Siren. Who else could it be? One light landed on the tip of her beak, which made her shake her head and blink. But Midoriya wafted his hand, preventing any more from traveling in her direction. He couldn't risk Night Eye's death. He let his power swell with the music. The golden glow reminded him of Eri, but perhaps that was why it presented itself as such. But it didn't do much to the hole in Night Eye's stomach, not without the chorus or words. That was where his power truly originated from. So he had to keep going, even though Midoriya was now gripping onto the side of the stretcher in a desperate bid to keep himself upright and standing. Every glow of light felt like it was tapping the energy from himself and transporting it to Night Eye. Perhaps he would have been able to hold on a little more securely if he knew he had the capability to save Siren too. Oh, Siren. She meant so much to Midoriya. No one else could ever truly understand how much she'd done for him. He let himself smile, only slightly, as he told himself, all heroes have heroes of their own. No matter their shape, size, meaning, or worth to others. To him, they'd shine as brightly as stars. They were his wings. He could never have learned to fly without them. Tears stream down your face when you lose something you cannot replace. The glow really wasn't rain anymore. Now it moved like the waves at high tide, lapping up against Night Eye as the hero's gaze reflected that glow in one of marvel and awe. Midoriya wondered what he saw in him. And Uraraka was still humming the tune from the instrumental on repeat, and Asui soon joined in. She was standing just behind him, holding Siren close and out of sight. Maybe she had come to the same conclusion as Midoriya. But this was starting to work now. At least make a visible difference. It had to. I promise you I will learn from my mistakes. Mirio was crouching down on the other side of the stretcher. It didn't take long for Midoriya to realize he knew the song. The older hero student took a shaky breath and started to sing too, if not quietly. Midoriya wasn't even sure if the words really fell from his mouth or if he was simply mouthing them, too weak from emotion to force them out. But Midoriya, he was weak too. He fell to his knees. Lights will guide you home. He let his mind wander back to the burning sunset on Dagobah Beach so long ago. He never thought that would ever lead to this. And I will try to fix you.
and a world as black as Siren's eyes swallowed him whole, lulling him into a deep, merciful sleep.
Songs used in this chapter: Over the Rainbow by Judy Garland, Radioactive by Imagine Dragons, and Fix You by Coldplay.